just about completed all my personal appearances for the year. So.
Really? That already?
Yeah. Trying to stop living my life in terms of the next thing I have to get through.
Okay, how did you do that? I'd like to figure that out.
I'm working on trying not to focus on things that are going to be unpleasant, you know, or even not unpleasant.
Okay, so how do you
Just
do that?
how do you do that? First, you notice that that's what you're doing. That's the first step.
We're ready.
Are we ready? Yeah, he indicated he was going to be out of town. Excuse me, but we are ready to begin. Call to order. Isabel, would you like to call the roll, please?
Commissioner Marks?
Yes, here.
Commissioner Parsley?
Here.
Chair Grossman?
Here.
And Commissioner Down is absent.
Yes. Okay, moving on to the approval of the minutes from May 7th. I'm not sorry, from June 4th. Any comments, concerns, questions, anything? Anybody wants to note about the minutes? If not,
I'll move the minutes.
okay.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay. Minutes are passed. Public comments. This is a time for persons desiring to address the commission on items that are not on the agenda. And it's a 3-minute limit, and we're not allowed to discuss any public comment at this point. Yes.
I didn't attend the city council meeting last night, but I know the CDBG funds were on the agenda. I'm assuming it passed. So I was wondering if SEJC ever has any input into how the CDBG funds are spent. And maybe you do, or maybe you don't, I don't know. I was just curious because there's a program in San Jose, I may have mentioned this at a meeting here, or maybe I mentioned it at the city council meeting, where the city is offering funds to people if they build an auxiliary dwelling unit, and it's like a forgivable loan, and then they have to promise to rent it to somebody with low income for a certain number of years. I think it's 5 years in San Jose, and other cities have done that. And I was thinking that would be a great use of CDBG funds, and so I was wondering, just wanted to kind of put that out there and just see if that's something that you have input into or given any thought. And then my other question, and I'm confused about this, and there may be a more clear answer. Last night when I looked it up, because I thought that it said that if you use the money, for instance, for curb cuts, which they were allocating over $500,000 for curb cuts, that the people, 51% of the people in the area had to be low income. But then I couldn't find that on a different website today, so I'm not sure if that's true. And I was just curious about the demographics of Albany. I'm also confused about the idea of low income, because I know that when I looked it up as a federal definition, that was like twice the poverty level, the poverty amount or whatever. But then I know have people said, well, low income in Albany is based on the income in this area. So I'm not really clear on what low income even means. But so those are just some questions I have. Thank you.
Can you address any of those, Isabel? Just answer questions.
Well, this is not an item on the agenda,
I know,
so
but I don't want to discuss
Julie,
it. I just want to see.
I'm more than happy to talk to you or email you some information on CDBG later on. Yeah.
In terms of the SEJC, whether they're interested in being involved, that was part of my
No, about your question about low income, how low income is defined.
Yeah.
And then the other part.
Okay. We'll look at that option on another agenda. Can't tonight. Yes. Yeah. Did you?
Hi. I wanted to talk, I mentioned this last night at the council meeting, that I'm very, okay, a year and a half ago when I started with Berkeley Food and Housing, I did not have a good experience. and I was really negative about them. And I felt I was kind of determined to do what I could to disengage our city from them. But that's beyond my control, so that's not anything I could do, but I was very angry and hurt. And in October, I started working with Caitlin, our case manager from that same outfit, and she's 100%. I really am very happy with her and the results I've gotten from her. So somewhere a few months ago, we left off where there would be some research on my part about people that had miserable experiences with BF&H. I had other disasters happening in my life where I couldn't take the time to pursue that. I think there's a consumer report. I think you mentioned that last night, so you've spoken to other consumers about that. So, but what I wanted to say is that in speaking to Caitlin, she's, or was, definitely overworked. It's like she had 30 people as her charges, and that's like an overloaded classroom. It's been reduced to 24 just by attrition. But my opinion originally is let's not throw more money at them, but now I'm feeling that if anything, they or equivalent agencies would need more money so they could hire more people. As long as those people were of the quality and the caliber of Caitlin, I mean, she exceeds my expectations every time. So I said this at the council meeting last night, and I will reiterate that to you guys, that I feel that these case managers are overwhelmed, overworked. I also have a couple of case managers with a hot team. And between Caitlin and Tony and Vivian, they still don't get everything done. So I would support at some point if a budget could be come up with for them to hire more case managers, but of a high quality, highly trained people. Words were spoken about maybe doing something similar in Albany. Like with Albany Cares and expanding upon that. With that, I think someone spoke about that last night. I could see that happening, and maybe we could work in tandem with Berkeley Food and Housing to do that. But I'm very happy with Caitlin. I've actually come up for housing, finally, after a year and a half on the wait list. And it's taking months. It's with Saha. So, of course, it's a bureaucracy. It'll take forever, but it will happen at some point. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say, an update about where I'm at about it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to hear that things are going well. And when's the next time we get a report from Berkeley Food and Housing Project?
It will be at your September meeting.
September, okay.
They won't be here, like, the plan is not to have them here, but to...
But it will be on the agenda,
Yeah.
so we can talk about that.
And that's when the client survey information will be
Yes, right, good.
included also.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none. Let's see.
Can I make a quick announcement?
Of course. Well, that's true, I didn't ask for staff announcements and commission announcements, so go ahead.
Okay. I heard this jackhammer in front of my house last week, so I knew they'd already done the sewers where I live, so I went out to find out what it was. And it turned out that they were installing a sign that said, basically, that RVs shouldn't be parked in Albany. And I just want to give an example of someone who lived in an RV, and I have his permission. Myron, one of our clients, was a client from the shower program, came every week, was living in his RV with his partner and his cats, and they lived in an RV for 4 years. He first lived in a shelter when he was 4 years old, and they finally got housing Caitlin got them housing. They're in a brand-new two-bedroom apartment in Oakland that they love. But these are people who are living in an RV on the streets of Albany. And, now they're telling people you can't be there anymore, and not everyone has been housed. And I just think it's, the timing right now, we got the A1 money. We finally got a good worker in Caitlin from BFHP. The timing is great right now, and so I don't know about the timing about putting those signs up. I think we can go about it in a more humane way.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just a couple quick announcements. I attended I just wanted to commend the city for the work that they've done to improve inclusivity and diversity in the last 6 months. And I attended this month the Juneteenth celebration at the Senior Center and also the flag raising for Pride weekend. So those are things to celebrate and things to be happy about. And I just wanted to announce that I was pleased and proud to be part of both of those. And there are more events coming that we can announce later.
Thank you. Isabel?
Yes, just as had been mentioned already, the BFHP contract got approved by council last night. So this is a one-year contract, and it includes 1.5 FTE. So the 0.5 FTE will be filled by Caitlin, who is currently away, but will be back in August, and BFHP will be working towards filling the full-time position.
And what's the amount of that contract?
Well, it includes HEAP funds. As you probably remember, the city has, the city council approved the use of HEAP funds for prevention, housing subsidies, and landlord incentives. So all of that together is $466,212. So, but the BFHP contract itself for operations is $165,000, and then it includes, $279,000, almost $280,000 in HEAP funds, which we have 2 years to spend, basically, and then $45,000 in CDBG funding that pays for the BFHP contract. So for a grand total of $466,000.
Thank you.
The staff report is on the website. If you go to the council meeting of July 1st, you'll be able to get all the information there.
Okay. We don't have any presentations, so next item is discussion of draft climate action and adaptation plan strategies. Hi.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Carrad. I'm the Civic Spark Climate Fellow with the City of Albany, so it's an AmeriCorps position. And tonight I will be talking about our new climate action and adaptation plan, which is currently in its public comment period, so it's in draft form. So, let me pull up my presentation. Okay. So the City of Albany has greenhouse gas reduction targets that are pretty ambitious and inspiring. Our goal is to have 25% emissions reductions compared to our 2004 baseline by 2020. And exciting news, we just did an inventory update with a consultant, and we found out that we hit 27% last year after the city opted everyone up into 100% carbon-free electricity. So we're well on our way to our 2035 goals for 60% reductions, and our 2050 goal is to be 100% carbon neutral. And the city in the plan is defining carbon neutrality as making as much emissions reduction as we can, and at 2050, any emissions that we aren't able to squeeze out, we'll find ways to pull carbon from the atmosphere to balance that out. So why climate action? Climate impacts are going to be global, but specifically in Albany, we're going to experience increased extreme weather events such as heat, rain, and flooding, some sea level rise along our shoreline, as well as increased wildfire risk, and also the wildfire smoke impacts that affect our community from neighboring communities' wildfires. So we want to be able to mitigate and adapt to those climate effects, as well as create all these co-benefits that are associated with local actions, such as creating a resilient community and economy, communities and economies that are able to adapt to the changing climate and be strong in the face of climate change. We can also improve local air quality, reduce some smog and also the toxins that are in the air that can affect health. We can beautify urban spaces with more green space and trees. We can boost public health and safety, create safe communities. And also, if we find local solutions, we can make sure those solutions are equitable and keep our own community in mind when we're taking action. So how equity factored into our CAP, we wanted to make sure that every measure that we considered took into account what impacts it would have, not just for climate change, but also for our community and our community members. So we have an equity icon on our CAP. If you look at each action, those actions that we believe could boost social equity have this kind of hands in a circle icon. And our goal in our vision is to create an Albany that is livable, equitable, and resilient for all community members. And in order to do that, for each measure that we considered putting in the plan, we did an analysis of how that might have equity implications. Our process, we wanted to create a plan that was a community plan, because we know that reaching carbon neutrality is not just something we can do on a city level, but it has to be a whole community level. We'll have to reduce emissions that come from our municipal buildings, as well as our community purchasing, transportation, and living habits. So we began the initial research in August of 2018, and then we kicked off our community engagement in October of 2018 with a community survey. It was really exciting to watch the responses come in. We got over 300 responses to the survey, which I thought was really exciting. And from that survey, we got kind of a baseline idea of what kind of actions community members wanted to take regarding climate change, and what the community thought of climate action planning at the city level. And what we found was that the community was very supportive and excited about tackling climate change and wanted to get involved in the planning process. So in November through December, we did internal staff interviews where we talked to key staff that will be involved in creating the plan and also in implementing many of the measures of the plan. From the community survey and those staff interviews, we created our public workshop, which was held in the council chambers in January of 2019. And we had over 65 members of the community come out to that meeting, where we put up different climate impacts as well as mitigation, or climate emissions, greenhouse gas emitters, sorry, that took me a second, such as natural gas use in building and transportation. And we had members of the community who attended the workshop actually write their unique solutions to how we can combat these issues on the pieces of paper that were stuck to the wall, and then we gave everyone sticky notes so that they could rate their favorite ideas and the ideas they did not like. From the information that we got from the community workshop, we got together stakeholders in the community. We had 4 stakeholder meetings. One was business associations, businesses and business associations, property owners and rental property owners, transportation stakeholders, and green infrastructure stakeholders. And then from all that engagement, we created the draft plan that you now have in front of you, which we hope encompasses the ideas that the community wanted to see in a plan and will help us get to our 2050 carbon neutrality goal. So what we have in the plan is 4 overarching themes. That is electrify new and existing buildings, transition to low carbon transportation, make our economy carbon free, and accelerate resilience for all. And that's really our adaptation and carbon sequestration component. So right now, we're in the public review process. So I've been presenting to the committees and commissions of the city. We've presented to the Economic Development Committee, the Climate Action Committee, the Traffic and Safety Commission, now the Social and Economic Justice Commission. We'll also be presenting to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission. And we also have our open public comment period, so we're soliciting public comment at these public meetings as well as through email, and we have a public comment survey that's out, which can be accessed through our website. So once this public comment period closes on the 19th, we'll take all the public comments, synthesize them, incorporate them into the plan with our consultants, and we'll also start working on our implementation plan. So the measures that you see in the CAP right now don't have a ton of implementation details, so the implementation plan will look at each measure and say, okay, so how are we going to do this? Then in September, we're hoping to take our CAP to a city council study session, and then we're hoping that the plan will be improved and ready to begin implementation in October. So I'll pause right here for a second and see if anyone has any questions before I move on to talking about specific actions that I would like to get the SEJC's comments on.
Lizzie, could you just be a little more specific about the website? I was on the city website today and couldn't find a link to comments, so can you tell me how exactly
Yes.
to navigate that?
Yeah, I apologize for that. So if you go to, I'm visualizing it. If you go to the top bar where it says departments,
Okay,
and then you click sustainability,
okay.
or underneath sustainability, you'll see climate action and adaptation planning. And then if you're looking at it on the computer, on the left-hand side, you should see climate action and adaptation planning, CAP 1.0, CAP 2.0. Yeah, those are the two main pages.
So I'm looking for 2.0 comments?
Yeah, I think it's on both
Okay.
CAP 1.0 and CAP 2.0, but CAP 2.0 page is where we have the bulk of the
All right.
information.
Thanks.
So, yeah. Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay. So our first section is electrification, and I've pulled out, well, first I'll start by saying I pulled out the measures that I would like to get the SEJC's comments on specifically. If you have other comments, we can save them on other measures. We can save them to the end, or you're more than welcome to just email me those comments, especially if they're anything about like formatting or wording. Please email them because it's easier for me to track those too via email. But the first measure is 1.1.1, adopt regulations to require all electric buildings for new construction and major remodels and redevelopment. And then that's also kind of tied to measure 1.2.10, which is identify a pathway for requiring all electric energy in new and existing buildings. So what we want to do here is reduce natural gas use in new and existing buildings because, as I mentioned earlier, Albany has 100% carbon-free electricity currently through East Bay Community Energy. So if we can reduce the use of natural gas in buildings, we're able to actually, and if we can electrify appliances from using natural gas to using electricity, we can run most of our city on 100% carbon-free electricity and then really take out some of those greenhouse gas emissions. We think that this one, we're hoping to deploy an incentive program, which is measure 1.2.5, so that we can equitably help people afford new appliances and retrofits. So that's the nexus of those three. We also have, in the electrification section, pursuing an increase in a utility user tax for natural gas to try to de-incentivize use of natural gas, as well as working with EBCE to continue incentivizing local renewable energy. So this is a few of the electrification measures that I would like to get SEJC's feedback, if you have any.
So you want us to talk about this one now?
Yeah, does that work? Is that
Okay. Anyone have a comment? If not, I appreciate the fact that you talked about helping people to afford this. But I think you're going to have to think about more than just helping people. There are significant, well, the majority of people in Albany, renters certainly, and owners to a great extent, are currently dealing with excessive housing costs. They generally don't have a lot of disposable money at this point, and even if they own a home, they may have significant equity, but that's not helpful when it comes to expenditures. So if in fact you're going to make this feasible, we're really going to have to help people And in some cases, we're going to have to pay the full freight, or people simply are not going to be able to do it. As much as they might like to, as much as they might understand the need, they have to really be able to afford it. So that would be a big concern with all of these areas, but this one in particular. Can the city really make it feasible for people to make these adjustments? And will the city monitor what the impacts might be, for example, in terms of raising rents? If landlords do this, they will be able to pass that cost on to renters. At the moment, we're seeing an acceleration in rent increases, and this might further exacerbate that. So I think we need to be realistic about what some of the barriers are going to be to this plan in general. Maybe that will be in the implementation plan. I was concerned that in this plan, it doesn't really talk very much about what the problems are going to be that we're going to be facing. And if we don't anticipate those, we're going to be at a tremendous disadvantage when we move on implementation.
I had a couple thoughts as well. First of all, Lizzie, I just wanted to say how happy I am that AmeriCorps is still in business and that you're here with us today.
Thank you.
But I did have some concerns about the use of the icon that you have, which is a lovely icon of 5 hands shared together and demonstrating that you feel that that's an equitable benefit. And I appreciate that you're asking us for, well, how do we do this today? So that's why you're here. You're really trying to get into the nitty-gritty of how do we accomplish these and how do we address the equitable issues that we want to have. So for the one that you've specifically highlighted, deploy an incentive program for electrification, the city currently has some incentives for low tax, or for taxes and for people who are low income not having to pay taxes on all of the items that are possible to be taxed within the city. That certainly is a stepstone to identifying individuals who might qualify for incentive programs for electrification. One of the challenges of that program is that it requires a reapplication every year because it is income driven, and hopefully incomes change year to year, but the fact is many people are on fixed income, so that there is some recurring eligibility that occurs within that. So I would look to that as a place to identify people and residents and parts of our community who could potentially qualify for grants or for electrification. I don't know what the source of those funds would be. I mean, it's possible that there are low-income housing programs that are coming through the pipeline that we might be able to tap into in the future that we could then allocate to individuals of low income. So I'd like to see that. So that's it on that one.
Thank you. Real quick follow-up. You said you had an issue with the icon.
I guess I have some broad overview comments on the whole presentation and the whole report. You tell us repeatedly through the report that you've addressed equity, but I'd really like to be shown how that's done. And I appreciate that you're here and asking for detail and information from us as to where to go to show that. But I do think that there's a presumption that you've made in terms of equitability in this report that may or may not be borne out by the 300 people who completed the survey or the 65 people who participated in the sticky paper exercise.
I just wanted to add something to what Bart said about there are people that apply for the low-income tax protection. And I understand from Preston Jordan, who I like the expert in Albany tax provisions for low income. What he has told me is that approximately 60 people in Albany have applied for these tax rebates. However, the PG&E low income rate in the city of Albany, there are 600 customers. that are eligible for that PG&E discounted rate. So I think we need to look beyond who's just applying for the city rebates. We should go to PG&E or other places that apparently have better information than the city has, because there's a big difference between 60 and 600, even though if it went up this year, hopefully it did, because I know the city sent postcards to every home, and there were other things that were done. Albany Cares really tried to get people to fill it out, but I still don't think the numbers are that great. So I would like you to look at the PG&E low-income customer base when you're looking at giving low-income customers some kind of credit or break.
And with an understanding that that low income gets more complicated when you're talking about these issues. We have people whose income is high, but their expenses are also enormous, and so they're really
Yeah.
not in a position to spend a lot of extra money.
Well, on the building development, that's the Saha building development at Cleveland, they're the lowest that they had. It said 20% of the AMI. So that's pretty, I think that's probably the lowest we can go to get someone into the apartment building anyway. So that's one way of defining. You know, you go to a percent of what the area median income is, and that's how you define what's low. But like you said, the expenses could, especially house payments now, could be really high.
So I guess the only things that I would add, I was actually going to mention the PG&E Cares program, which is probably a better way to find out for low income, how many low income users there are in Albany. I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around and thinking of just this one or everything as a whole. I think the idea of an incentive program is great. Obviously, if you get incentive versus mandate, incentive would be better. I just did a quick search of how much switching from an electric furnace to an electric furnace from a gas furnace. I have a gas furnace. I think probably a lot of people that live in older homes in Albany have gas furnaces. And it's definitely less expensive for a electric furnace. There's pros and cons, just like with anything. I think the real meat of it's going to be how much the HVAC person is going to be charging you. You know, it's between $2,000 to $4,000 for an electric furnace. Being that we're in the Bay Area, I would probably say that we're going to be in the $4,000 range for a furnace, and probably an additional $4,000 in labor. Switching from removal of a gas furnace, capping the line, and switching to an electric. So you're looking probably in the $6,000 to $8,000 range to change to an electrical furnace. That's a pretty steep, you know, for not just, you know, your average homeowner, but for somebody that's low income. I think the real question is going to be, obviously natural gas is cheaper, and that's going to be the problem. And I think the real struggle is going to be with businesses, because most restaurants aren't going to cook with electric. That's just the facts. But I'm all for new construction being all electric. I think that's a great idea. And if we can find a way to make it cheaper to switch to an electric furnace, I think that's a great thing.
Thank you.
Anyone from the audience? Yes. Yeah, yeah, we'll make a little room for you.
Well, maybe you can stand close by to answer my questions. You can share the mic. My first question is, it looks as though the benefits go to a church. Is that what that top icon is? What's the, could you explain the icons?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'll say, we've gotten a lot of reactions about the icons, so we will be addressing them. But if you have the cap in front of you, if you look on page 31, the homes are the cost to community. So it's like the cost to the individual homeowner. The kind of construction man is the cost to the city. Is this the church the church-looking icon?
I'm still not clear what
This one?
this is. No, what this is.
That's the cost of the city, so they're little construction men. The homes are for individual homeowners.
And then there's a person that looks like,
Yes, the yellow.
no, they're black. The white dress.
Yeah, so this is the cost of the city. This is the cost to homeowner. This is greenhouse gas reduction potential, so if there's one, it's low potential, if there's three, it's higher potential. This yellow is like our leadership potential, like ability to be pioneering. And then over here, the sun is resilience, so it's like adaptation or carbon sequestration. And the blue is feasibility. So it gets a blue icon if it's thought to be relatively feasible to do. Yeah.
Okay.
I think getting the community involved in this is a great way of doing community building, which I think is important in a number of respects. Also, in terms of incentives, there are a number of low-income people, but people living on a fixed income. For example, I'm looking at putting solar panels on my house, and there's an opportunity to get a 30% tax incentive if you pay for solar panels, but I don't make enough money to pay a tax, so I'm not getting that incentive of a $5,000 or $6,000 tax return. So my system essentially costs me $20,000 instead of $15,000. So when you look at incentives, looks at maybe a way to give incentives to people who are considering putting solar panels on, but they don't. Should I come back?
You're going to have another half a minute because there was a lot of shared time there.
Let's see.
If you want to think about it, you can come back.
I can come back?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes?
Just had a question. I think on the first slide, there was a map of California on the upper right-hand corner with drought colors. Was that estimated how the state would be affected by 2050? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure exactly what it was representing.
Chair Grossman, I wonder if questions from the audience to Lizzie could be, maybe Lizzie could, if you have a card, or you could leave your information and you could respond to them. Because the purpose of Lizzie's presentation right now is to get the SCJC's input, and then perhaps any question, feedback from the audience is great, but maybe the questions could be directed to Lizzie at a later time.
Okay, so let's focus on comments.
I think I have a comment.
Go ahead. Sure you do.
So the incentive tax, the carbon tax, basically?
The tax on natural gas.
Increase on natural gas. That tax money has to go somewhere. Does that go to PG&E, or does it go to the local community for possibly incentive programs? I wish it would say that. Does it say that in the report?
Okay, great. Julie?
So I have a few comments, just starting with the feedback from the community. 300 people is 1.7% of the population. If you think 17,000, I'm not really sure what the current population of Albany is.
19.6.
So it's even smaller percentage. And then 65 is 0.3% of 17,000, so it'd be even smaller. So you actually didn't talk to very many people in the community. And I think one of the problems is your way of reaching out. And there was a joke that I just was looking up to see when it started. I think it started in the early 1920s about a drunk man looking for a quarter or his glasses or a dollar bill. There's a lot of versions of it. And he's looking around and a police officer comes over and says, "What are you looking for?" And he says, "I'm looking for my glasses." And they look for a little minute and the police officer says, "Are you sure this is where you lost them?" And he says, "No, I actually lost them over there, but it's darker over there, it's lighter over here, so I'm looking here." And I feel like that's sort of what we do in Albany, is we do the easy way of reaching out to the community. So we don't go out and talk to people in person. We don't go to schools. We don't go to PTA meetings. We don't go to churches. We don't go to the community center. We just don't reach out. So we think if we put it on the website, and according to your instructions to Judy, it's 4 steps on a website. So if somebody actually braves that, has access to the internet, or goes to the library to use it, and then has to click 4 times, I think that's probably asking a lot. So I really would encourage you to find a better way to reach out to the community, and you might actually, some of the things that people might object to tonight would have probably come up if you were able to reach maybe even 10% or 20% of the community versus 0.5, 0.3%. So that's one point. And then another one is that the word resilience implies to me that there's bad things happening and they will continue to happen. And rather than addressing the bad things, we just tell people to buck up and be resilient. So I would really encourage you to rethink using the word resilience, because we really don't want people to be resilient. We want them to have a healthy, supportive city where they don't have to be resilient. And equity, I second the comments that were made about equity by the SEJC. I also wanted to address power outages. I know that PG&E is talking about having more and more things where they're going to be turning off the power, relying on gas for your furnace, which we do, for our hot water heater, which we do, for our stove, which we do, and we're in the process of trying to put in a backup gas generator that's linked into our gas line, natural gas line, because we have a sump pump. So if it's raining heavily and the power goes out, we don't want the lower part of our house to be full of water or sewage, which has happened to us also. So I would wonder what was going to happen if you were on a 100% electric grid, unless there's some way that this power isn't hooked into the larger electric grid. When the power goes out, what are people going to do? So that's just my thought about that. I think that might be power outages, talking to the community. Yes, I think that was it. Thank you, and thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so Lizzie, go ahead.
As we all know, I'm homeless, and because of that, I'm very disengaged from this whole thing about climate change. I'm aware of what's going on. I look at the news every day, but it's just a rumination as I'm listening to the presentation. How can we engage homeless people in this, in that we don't have homes? What can we do to do our part? I didn't know what else to say about that. It's just more thoughts. We're members of the community. We're part of this whole thing. Climate change will affect us as much as people with homes, and how we can do our part. So that's just kind of a thought that percolated as you were talking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lizzie, you can roll on.
Thank you for the comments. And as Isabel mentioned, I can circulate a card for people who want to email me. My email is also on the last slide. And I encourage you, if you have more comments or want to talk more about this, please email me or call me. I'm happy to talk about climate action planning. So the next section is transportation, and we pulled 2 measures that we would like input on. developing a new active transportation plan, and our goal with this plan is to make it more enjoyable and a better option to bike and walk, and take other modes of transportation throughout the city and increase access to transit, and also working with third-party programs to provide shared mobility options. We're envisioning more micro-mobility here to address, the last mile gap between a public transit endpoint or start point and someone's home or destination. So please let me know if you have any comments on this one.
Okay, anybody want to start?
I'll start. I'm way over here on the side. So I want to sort of take a few minutes to talk about what an active transportation plan looks like for someone with a disability or mobility impairment and a frail elder. And I'm not convinced that I know what that could in any imagining look like, but when I was walking back from the Giants game the other day, there was a series of three-wheeled pedicabs that were out on the streets, and I wonder if the introduction of the idea of a non-carbon-based transportation system for seniors and people with disabilities who are mobility impaired could be introduced into this transportation plan. In addition to that, I'm really concerned about the active transportation plan that's in place now, where we have frail elders and people with mobility challenges walking next to electric scooters on public walkways. And I think we need to really focus on protecting individuals who are vulnerable in their mobility and making sure that we have separate walkways for those folks.
And 13.3% of our population in Albany is disabled, and 15% are seniors. There's maybe some overlap, but it's a significant part of the population for which a lot of these new approaches just aren't feasible. So I think that's important. And I think we need to think about what's realistic in terms of transportation. We want to encourage people to use public transportation. Actually, people are using less public transportation. And one of the reasons is that there are other ways of getting around now, such as Uber and Lyft and things of that nature, where you actually get to go where you want to go when you want to go. Which for people who can afford it is a lot more convenient than waiting for a bus. So I make a practice that when I drive around during the day, and I see buses, I look to see if anybody's on them. And in the afternoons, before and after rush hour, the buses, especially those giant buses, are often empty. What they do is slow down traffic, which increases pollution. So I think we need to have a national conversation about how we're going to come up with alternative transportation that actually works for people. We have people in Albany who are able to bike. Many people aren't, but people do. However, we also have parents who have to drop multiple kids off at school, have to pick them up, have to get to work, maybe need to stop to get something, for the household. Where a bicycle is really, for many of them, just not a feasible means of transportation, and where public transportation is not efficient. Just as an anecdote, when I had kids and I had to drop them off, I drove because I could get to work on the bus, but it would take 45 minutes, or I could drive and get there in 10. So, we have to have systems of public transportation that are not experienced by people as a punishment, but actually as a reasonable way of getting around and doing their business. If we don't have that, we can develop all the plans we like, but they're not going to work because they won't work for people. And what will happen is we'll make it harder for people to get around by cars, but they will continue to do so, which will mean traffic will be slower, and which will increase pollution. So I've yet to see one of these action plans that really took a look seriously at what public transportation should look like in the future. And I think it's important that we do that if we really want a system that's going to work for people.
I guess I'll jump in. I just want to agree with what Bart said. It's really difficult when you have to get a child to school and then turn around and try to be at work 20 minutes later. So it's, I work for the university, and I could ride my bike to work, but it would take a half hour to 45 minutes, and I wouldn't be able to take my son to school. As Bart said, I could take the bus, but again, the same thing, or I could drive to work and be there in 10 minutes. So one of the other issues is the efficiency of both AC Transit and BART is seriously lacking. And cost efficiency of specifically BART now is becoming problematic. BART is becoming so expensive that it's almost become cheaper to drive. So, and then again with bicycles, and not every bicyclist is the same. I think a lot of folks in this town would like to believe that, but not every bicyclist are made the same. So I think not every something in the ATP that may benefit a certain segment of cyclists may not benefit all cyclists. So I think the goal is to try to look for something that benefits the entire community and not just a certain segment of it. I would say as much as I know people like them, I would like to see less electric scooters. I like them even less than I like electric bikes. And that program didn't work well in Albany. And I'm not quite sure if it's working well in a lot of places in the Bay Area. But electric scooters are becoming more and more problematic because they're not docked. So they are typically left in the middle of the roadway where possibly somebody with a disability, possibly somebody that's elderly might have to try to move that out of the way because typically they're left in the middle of the sidewalk, and that's not a good system. So if we were looking at something along those lines, it would have to be something that would be docked, so that they would have to go back into the dock and therefore wouldn't be in the way of pedestrians. I like the idea of exploring an electric shuttle. I wish we could have a BART station, but that ship has sailed. But I think that's an interesting idea, and I think that you look at certain areas, Emeryville, although I don't think theirs is electrified, but they do have a public transit system that's free to the public, and that's somewhat benefited to the business community as well. So there's a little bit of crossover in there. So maybe something along those lines. Like it's a much larger issue. We have to have businesses, a variety of businesses for people to come to. So that's a whole separate issue. But I think definitely exploring some type of shuttle, especially for people with mobility issues and that can, in addition to the senior shuttle, which is a wonderful system, but it's not the greatest system if I have to go from my house to somewhere else in the city on the other side of town. Even though it's 1.5 miles, it's still quite far. So that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you.
Anyone from the audience? Yes.
Do we want to save public comment for the end of all the slides?
I think that
It might be
would,
better if they're general comments. We can save
Okay.
them all till the end.
Okay, well, we want to have as much input as possible, so let's give the people a chance. But let's try not to repeat what other people have said.
I'd like to give a shout out for America too. You're doing a really nice job in taking notes. I think you're hearing everything. When we talk about third-party incentives, what is it? Third-party programs? We're talking about automobiles, trains, whatever. I think telecommuting has really got to be emphasized, and you can go to some large corporations, you can go to the university, you can go to more internet education, and you can still have opportunities for students to meet with their professors or their teaching assistants. And for somebody working at PG&E, for example, maybe they could work 2 days a week instead of 5 as an extreme, as a goal. And they wouldn't need to get on the freeway and burn gas, and the electricity that you use on your computer could be solar power and generated. Thank you.
Just, this is like a personal thing I've been involved in, not a professional thing, but I've always been interested in public transportation my whole life. And one thing I should just mention is that the public transit industry, pretty much in major cities by 2030, are expecting to have their fleets to be totally electric. And the technology is moving that way. Even if you read about what's going on with cars and manufacturers, they're looking at, phasing out cars that are using gas and diesel and so on. How fast that's going to happen and how they're going to be recharged is another question, which I think would affect everybody in the community. The idea of a shuttle within Albany, I've always thought would have been an interesting idea, especially now if it could be an electric vehicle of some kind or vehicles, and really encouraging people, as inefficient and as expensive as BART is, to use the shuttle, have it operate maybe more frequently in commute hours. There were some women at the most recent Traffic and Safety Commission that are concerned about how their kids are going to be getting to the schools in the next 3 or 4 years because of the remodeling that's going on and how they get from University Village to those schools. So some kind of a shuttle would be of interest to them, I'm sure. But an electric shuttle, I know it comes with money, but something that would be part of what the city would have to do, I'm not sure how it would be paid for. It would sort of deal with the last mile type of situation. And it might be a way to sort of put people on the spot to say, well, if you're really for, meeting these goals, you're going to have to look at your lifestyles and maybe not use your cars all the time, but walk, bike, and also use the shuttle, and that's what you take to BART and so forth. But anyway, just throw that out.
Okay, yes. Let's move along quickly here.
As a mid-level disabled person, I don't have a wheelchair. I'm not totally disabled. I have mobility issues, a lot of pain in my feet and legs, and it's hard for me to walk, so now I have my walker. I hate the bus. I hate BART. I hate all of these public transit things. For me personally, I see the use of them. I see the need of them. I'm not saying get rid of them, but a person like me is not going to be found dead or alive on public transit. The logistics for me are staggering. To get to a bus stop, to wait, to get on and off a bus, and then it takes hours and hours and hours, and you're surrounded by crazy people. So there has to be some other thing that I don't know about that can address the concerns of people who have sort of disabilities. What do I do with this? I myself, how do I fold this thing up and get it on and off the bus and all this stuff, and people making a spot for me and stuff? Where I'm going to be moving soon has underground parking, but it's not, I have to get on a wait list to access it. So I have this car. What do I do with my car? How do I get around? I park my car miles away and have to get to the building and get back. And all this mobility stuff is a real challenge. So someplace in this, we have to take into account that there's a few of us who have these disabilities that aren't really accommodated by public transit. Getting around, how do I go grocery shopping? How do I get it to my unit? All these things, every aspect of my life is spent dealing with these logistical challenges, moment to moment. How do I function in this world? It has wheelchairs on the door, has grab bars, but that's the extent of it. This world is not user-friendly for disabled people. So that has to be part of the deal. How do we function in this new world that is coming? Thank you.
Okay, one more, Julie, and then we'll go on.
You're running out of people.
Yeah. Never know.
All right, so I wanted to, I appreciate the people on the SEJC, on the commission, bringing up the disabilities, and Leah bringing up disabilities. So I just want to reiterate that I think that's really important. And then this is something that I'd already thought about when I was looking at this in advance, the section of equitable, and you have it on here too, the idea of walkable, bikeable, and affordable neighborhood is as being a goal. I think you might want to expand that so that, because some people, as was pointed out, can't walk or bike, and it shouldn't be that that's like, this is our vision of the perfect city is something that's walkable and bikeable. You're leaving people out. And then I also wanted to point 3 under equitable, equity drives our sustainability. Initiatives are developed in collaboration with communities of color, low-income populations, and other vulnerable groups. I would really encourage you to reword that so that you are saying it's in collaboration with everyone. You don't want to other people, pull out people. And using the word vulnerable in reference to any population is really tricky and I think questionable. Thank you.
Lizzie, could you do there are 2 more, right? Why don't you do the 2, and then we'll take any of the further comments at the end.
Sounds good. Okay, so the next one is still from our transportation sector, but it looks specifically at housing. So the 2 measures are to amend the zoning ordinance to allow for higher density development, which can reduce VMT and also provide more housing, and introduce a unit parking swap program for developers. So it's saying if you reduce a parking spot, you can add additional units beyond what is currently restricted by the code, which provides more housing and also lowers transportation emissions. They're very similar measures, but slightly different. So any comments on these?
Why don't we go on, and then we'll do comments at the end.
Okay.
People can take notes or something they want to say.
So our last one is from the carbon-free economy and resilience section. We have work regionally to support and facilitate food donation programs. We want to make sure that food that has been prepared, in a safe, clean kitchen doesn't just go into, like, for example, from a business, doesn't go into the waste and then produce methane emissions. Instead, it's redirected to someone who can eat it. And then 4.4.1, which is inventory, identify, and maintain adequate community safe spaces for poor air quality. And we want to add heat in there too, which the city is already working on. A couple weeks ago when we had the extreme heat, our neighborhood services put out information on where to access heat spaces, but we want to, that's in our what we're already doing section, but we're also going to highlight it here based on a comment we got. So just wanted to add that quick little note. And I believe those are the last 2 sections. So if you want to provide comment on those 2, let me know.
Well, I would point out the obvious contradiction in having an item on increasing density and followed by an item on reducing parking. That might make sense if we had a public transportation system that actually worked for people, but we don't. So And one of the the move toward increased density on the assumption that people will use public transportation, which is sort of the thought behind a lot of this transit hub center development. Actually, the studies I've seen suggest that, in fact, people who live in those buildings own cars. They may use public transportation, but they generally own vehicles. So, in fact, when you reduce parking, what you're doing is creating a situation where people can't park. We did a study in Albany a few years ago on parking, and it keeps coming up because people cite it as a suggestion that we have enough parking. The problem with the study is it ended at 7 o'clock, which is when people come home and park. So it missed the height of the parking problems. So I think, we have a responsibility, if we're going to plan in a sensible way, to really deal with the reality of people's lives and with the reality of what happens, rather than with some notion of wouldn't it be good if. It would be great if people didn't own cars, but they can't get around without them. Some people can, but most people can't. So, if we're going to really move away from individual vehicles, we need to have an alternative that actually works for people, that's affordable, that's efficient. And we haven't seen that yet. So that would be my big concern about parking and transportation. Also, I think to throw into that, if in fact we're moving in the direction of electric cars, and maybe eventually in the direction of autonomous cars, and yet we're moving now in the direction of getting rid of parking and making it more difficult for people to drive, we create a situation where we undermine ourselves, because there may be an efficient way of getting around that reduces environmental destruction, but make it harder for people to use that if we rely on a public transportation system that is really not effective for most people. So, other thoughts about this, about the other issues?
I like the idea of higher density. I know it's some people are afraid of it. I think in the right zone, I think it's perfectly fine. I think San Pablo is certainly okay for higher density housing. But like with Bart saying, parking is one of the 15 third rails in Albany. So the reality is, again, without reliable public transportation and effective, it's just not really feasible to give a contractor or a developer allowing them more apartments or more dwellings for less parking. I mean, it sounds nice, but it's just not feasible. It's kind of like having a high occupancy vehicle lane full of people that can afford the sticker on the back of their Prius, or they're not high occupancy vehicles. They're just really expensive vehicles with stickers. So it's kind of that same mindset. I think having a system where someone comes and picks up food from businesses or whatnot is a wonderful idea. I'm not quite sure why it hasn't been put in place yet in Albany. So we are, and the reality is, we complain a lot, but there is quite a few caring people, and even though sometimes we're at odds with each other, there's still a lot of caring people here, and I just hadn't thought about that until I just read it, that hadn't been put into place, something like that hadn't been put into place, especially with as many restaurants as there are along Solano and San Pablo. So I think that's a great idea, and hopefully that can be something sooner rather than later in this plan.
Anything else? Anyone?
Margie, just a couple. Well, just a couple real quick comments, and thanks again. This whole idea of introducing a unit swap program for developers, my heart doesn't really bleed terribly for developers, but it would be interesting to think about the parking swap tied to some sort of incentive program for people who don't have cars, who are in the city, who are low income. So if transportation subsidies could be provided for individuals who don't own cars, who don't park, who don't need unit swap out programs, that would, I think, maybe justify putting an equity icon in that column. But as it's written now, I'm concerned that we really haven't addressed too much equity in incentivizing developers. I'd like to incentivize people to not have cars.
I'd like to say finally, because we've provided a lot of critique, that I think it's very important and valuable that you're doing this work, and the way you're going about it in terms of involving the community is a good thing. And you know, the things that I think we've talked about are things that a lot of planners tend to ignore. And I would suggest that we could be different in Albany. We actually could, you know, we're small enough, we're involved enough, we're engaged enough, that we really could have some dialogue about how to create a better future and not be bounded by what exists in the present.
Great. Thank you, and thank you all so much for your feedback. As I mentioned, we're soliciting public comment through July 19th. So you can send it to me. This is my email address. I'll also put cards in the back that have my phone number. And then I also encourage you, if anyone would like to come to City Hall at any time and let me know if you want to talk about the climate action plan, please do. I want as much comment as possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, I'll put my cards in the back. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. Sure. You've been patient. Why not?
I've just been sitting over there listening to what's going on and what the comments are and everything. And I would like to commend Lizzie for all the hard work she's done. It's an incredibly complex issue, as I'm sure you're all aware. And I just wanted to reiterate that, well, I just got back from a trip to Europe where they have an excellent, I wouldn't say excellent, but a very good rail system. I've spent a fair amount of time in Japan, which does have an excellent rail system. You can get almost anywhere at any time with very little wait by train. We don't have that luxury here because we are what we are. And to make these changes that need to happen is going to take an incredible effort by the entire community, because what you're doing is reshaping society. And to reshape society is not as easy as flipping on a light switch. It's going to take a lot of hard work, which you are doing and which Lizzie is doing, and I'm sure other people are as well. So I'm not making any suggestions. I'm just commenting that I don't envy you this task. I think changes need to be made, but we need to be realistic that it's not going to be an easy process.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on. What I would like us to do briefly is, we have set up 2 subcommittees and 1 area that will be a subcommittee eventually. I think it'd be useful to talk about each of those in terms of what the people on the subcommittee are thinking, and also the rest of us, because these subcommittees are part of us, so that we all have some clarity about what the charge of each committee is going to be and what the products and outcomes are going to be, so that we don't find ourselves at some point in a couple of months with a report that we disagree with because it doesn't represent something we thought was important. So I will start with the Housing Subcommittee, although I will say that I don't really feel like a subcommittee. And what I see myself doing at this point is monitoring the development of the Washington-Cleveland property and staying clear about what might be coming along in terms of incentives and possibilities, but really not doing anything terribly aggressive until we finish some of our other priorities so that we can staff that subcommittee. It's also not a bad time because at the level of the state legislature, there's not terribly much going on at this point. There will be later on. So we do have this one project coming up in Albany, and I think that's where most of the energy is going for development. I don't know of anything more, but I will stay in touch with the development department and see if there are other further plans. So I will be sort of playing a monitoring function for now. Any other thoughts about that for now? Okay. So then, moving on to, and I'll allow we'll have input at the end of this, okay? Just want to make sure we have enough time. Inclusivity. Yes.
Thank you. Greg Downs, who is the other member of the Inclusivity Subcommittee, sends his apologies for being in Mexico City and having fun tonight. But he and I did meet, and we had a pretty productive session, and I'd like to just sort of recap what our meeting was and propose one item to go forward to council this evening and one item to review and discuss in terms of the question that Bart raises, are we in agreement and are we on track with what we're doing going forward? So in terms of background for what Greg and I did and are continuing to do, we are reaching out to as many community members as we can individually and in public forums to solicit input with regard to their inclusivity thoughts and how we can better address the question of diversity within the city. We both went back through the last 2 years of inclusivity and diversity work that the commission had done. And we reviewed the draft letter to the city from September 24th, 2018. We also reviewed recent council meetings in which our work plan was presented very ably by Bart. And we were basically given a nod, if I'm not mistaken, to go ahead with an inclusivity memo. So for our action item tonight, if we want to have one, I'd like to take a look at the inclusivity memo draft, which is in the packet. Can we move to that in the packet, Isabel? Can we put that in the packet, from the packet for the public? The inclusivity memo that's on the page 62 or 63 of the packet for our meeting tonight.
And there are a few copies in the back also.
Oh, that's fine, too.
There's probably not enough for everybody, so.
Okay. So just going ahead while we're pulling that up, this inclusivity memo has been tweaked by Greg Downs and myself, based on comments that we've had from other commissioners, based on comments that we've had from the public, and based on directives that we assumed from council in conversation after Bart's presentation of the work plan. So what we'd like to do tonight is present basically a recommendation to the city, to the council, that every staff report and almost every issue that is in front of the city council requires a staff report, that those reports all have as part of them, as a standard part of the framework in those reports, a paragraph or two on the impact of inclusivity. So the inclusivity piece further down here is The inclusivity impact report, you could just stop right there. Yeah. The inclusivity impact report will include a narrative review of the proposed policy or legislation and that policy's potential impact upon the potentially underrepresented groups. The impact report is not presumed to be a comprehensive or data-driven, but rather a reflection of available information. What it'll do is create a specific and purposeful opportunity to reflect on potential issues surrounding inclusivity. It is expected that it won't be longer than 1 or 2 paragraphs, and that there will be instances in which it will simply be not applicable. So just like the City Council currently receives reports where they have a sustainability impact, we are now proposing, if we agree tonight, to suggest to the Council that they direct staff to include a paragraph on inclusivity. So I don't have this formatted as a motion, and I'm not sure we're ready to have a motion. Do we need a motion before we can discuss, or do we discuss first? No. Okay. So I'd like to just open it to discussion and input, particularly from commissioners who've been on the commission in prior years, if this is a step in the direction that we want to take.
Now, I know previously we had talked about a social and economic justice impact report. Is this along those lines, or is this something separate?
No, this is step one. The diversity impact report will be the second half of my presentation. So this is just the first step. And if you'd like me to go ahead with the diversity impact report, I can, but I think it'd be a little clearer to just get this through and then talk about diversity. Yeah.
So now we would be having they would be having 2 separate reports on.
At this point, no, just one.
Yeah, this one is related to the new legislation. The other one is a separate report card, which is an ongoing thing.
According to the housing element, 30% of Albany's population is Asian. And I feel like it's almost invisible minority, like we don't see them. I looked on this chart for the city. Of the 140 employees, 23 are Asian.
Right. I'd like to hold that conversation, which is the other 2 pages of our report, for the diversity part. This is simply to direct the staff who are preparing reports for the council, staff reports to the council, to just stop for a minute and say, did we think about inclusivity when we wrote this report?
And when we're looking at inclusivity, can we also include people with disabilities, or, are we only looking, like, what are we looking at?
We're looking at underrepresented groups, including those defined by age, gender identity, race, ethnicity, disability status, sexual orientation, primary language, economic status, education level, and housing status.
Okay, that was good. Okay.
Would it be out of order, or something, at least something for you guys to think about, if we talked about it in terms of a social and economic justice impact report, so that it's a bit broader than just inclusivity, but it deals with any area where a piece of legislation might have an inequitable effect. A lot of that has to do with inclusivity, but there are other actions the city takes which might inadvertently disadvantage people where the city may not have thought about what the consequences would be. So I would like to see us really think about what the social justice implications are of the things that we do in the city, which sometimes don't seem like they're about social justice, but can create social injustice. You know what I mean?
I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree with you on very many levels. The latter part of this report does reflect an option for SEJC to review on an annual basis the inclusivity impact reports that are written by staff. It doesn't really get at what you're talking about in terms of everything that the city does, every step that the city takes. That's a little hard to capture.
I'm not suggesting everything, but
right.
Major things.
But I think if we were to review the inclusivity impact reports on an annual basis and just come up with some sort of summary, well, looks like we're missing it here, or it looks like we really hit it there, that might address some of your concerns.
I would think it'd be helpful to call it perhaps inclusivity and social justice impact, something like that. But I'm just putting that out for you to think about.
Thank you.
Anything else? But I think, you know, the council is supportive of this. Where it might be helpful, because they, you know, Peggy had suggested that staff work on this, and I think this will move it along in terms of maybe putting some more priority on it for the staff, is perhaps if you give some examples of some of the kinds of issues that might come up that would need to be addressed. And maybe take a look at some recent pieces of legislation that have passed and what the social justice concerns might have been. So that people have a sense of what we're talking about. Because it can seem a little vague if we don't provide an example. But anyway, again.
Well, I'd be happy to entertain changes to the language that's up on the screen there. Do you have some thoughts about the way you'd like it rephrased?
I would like to see just maybe another section that would be examples. And I you know, I would have to do some thinking too. But, you know, but given that this is, you know, really in a way to be helpful to staff, I mean, you know, what we're basically saying is staff are going to have to prepare this thing. What are the staff going to need to think about? How are they going to understand what the issues might be in a piece of legislation?
So would you like to hold this over to another month? We would next be meeting in September with the revision to be presented to you at that time.
What's your feeling about that?
I'm ready to go.
What about if we did it in 2 steps? In other words, that we approve what you've got here, and then maybe we would provide some additional examples going forward.
Yeah.
Because I'm ready to support the notion here, you know. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Yes, agreed.
Are we done? Are we ready to move on? Do we need so we need a motion. You want to make a motion? And then we can have.
So the motion will be that the inclusivity impact report is approved conceptually, and there will be an additional section added relating to specific examples based on prior experiences, which will elucidate what would be included in a staff report.
Okay, good. Second?
Second.
Okay. So now if we can have community comments on the motion.
I'm glad you're working on this. I think it's great, and I look forward to seeing what else happens, how it moves forward. I had a couple questions. One is, I've expressed interest over the last many months about being part of this, and I was told last time that the community could be involved. I couldn't be on the subcommittee, but I could be contributing. But I didn't know that you were meeting, and I'm wondering how you're noticing these meetings that you're having with Greg, and how I would find out so that I could participate. So that was one of my questions, because this is very important to me, and I would like to be involved. And then second, I think that I'm confused, I guess. I understand that what you're saying is that these are people that need to be, these underrepresented groups need to be included, and the question will be, were they included or were they taken into account, the impact on them was taken into account, and you're asking the staff to do that in Albany, and I'm wondering, I agree with Bart that it would be great to have examples, but I'm still wondering about putting that in their hands. It seems like, I don't know, my experience with the staff in general is not, that might not be the first, they might not be very good at it. They might not have the skills or the understanding. Is there going to be some sort of training? Is there going to be some sort of something that would help them so that they could do this? Because I really don't think it comes naturally to most people to look with a critical eye at some of the things that are happening. For example, the report that we had earlier, some of the language in there, I think it's just that's because the people who were involved were not people with disabilities or not people of color, whatever. So the staff is at a disadvantage in a lot of ways because they probably don't represent many of these groups. So I'm just wondering if there's some way, it's sort of like saying they all have to administer CPR but not giving them the CPR training. So I'm just wondering about that. Thank you.
So this isn't a comment on your motion, but it's a comment on procedure. Should I wait and say something at the end?
Say whatever you want to say now.
Okay. I came here primarily, Alan Maris, Albany resident. I came here primarily to hear about the Housing Subcommittee update. And all we heard about was just a brief reference to the current proposed affordable housing project, but we didn't cover anything about investigating funding sources, receiving updates regarding the rent review. I came to here to see something about that, or hear something about that, and if I see this on a future agenda item, I'm kind of going to be reluctant to come because I'm concerned that the agenda item may not be properly covered.
Well, let me explain that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, on the rent review, we will be dealing with the rent review. We'll be getting regular reports on the rent review. Those will be coming to the whole commission. In terms of the housing subcommittee, we don't really have a housing subcommittee yet because we don't have enough people. So consequently, I'm sort of minding the store until we finish on some of these other tasks, and then we will beef up the subcommittee. But in the meantime, I will continue to be reporting to the commission on what goes on in terms of the planning of the building that's underway, and monitoring what goes on at the state level that might create opportunities for funding. So it's sort of a holding action at this point.
But it could have said that on the agenda, and I would have stayed home.
Okay.
And if I see it on a future agenda, I'm going to be reluctant to come as well, because the other thing is, I think we could have had a little bit more about the process on the new affordable housing project that we have seen may I do that?
Sure. You have a minute and a half. Go ahead.
We have had one public review of a concept design, and SAHA, Satellite Affordable Housing, is planning to come to the community, I would say, sometime in the next few weeks, certainly the next month, so that it would be appropriate, I think, to tell the community that report from Satellite Affordable Housing is coming probably hopefully before your next meeting, so that people could attend. And I think an important part of that whole process is the state and regional funding, that we understand how SAHA is putting together a package which will allow the community to have this satellite affordable housing without having to form a public housing group. That satellite affordable housing will be performing that for the city. They'll also, one of their goals is to make it possible so that they will absorb any extra costs, so that the community will not be faced with funding this affordable housing project. Satellite affordable housing will go through that whole process, find the sources of funding, so that Albany can have an affordable housing project without a cost to the community.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any scheduled meeting at this point.
We were told that. Were you at the last?
Yes, I was
I
there.
thought you might be.
Yeah.
They announced it at the
I
last.
announced that there would be another meeting, but I suspect that they'll probably not do that in August. That's
I'm talking about July. They actually said towards the end of June at that meeting.
so far.
And it would just be a matter of calling Saha and confirming when their
Yeah, I will
next
do that.
meeting. Okay, will that appear on the website somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for alerting us to that. Okay, so back to the motion, which is to approve concept of inclusivity impact report, and with additions that we've discussed, and whatever else the committee might feel is appropriate. So we have a motion and a second. Are people ready to vote?
I just have a point of clarification. So inclusivity impact report approved conceptually, and examples will be added for review.
The recommendation to council will include examples of
Yeah.
inclusivity based on
What?
based on what?
What do you mean? Examples of,
Based on what the commission says are examples of inclusivity?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. But will this be reviewed by the full commission again in September?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the document itself will be reviewed.
Okay. Okay. I'll be back with you on what you recommend I include as
Okay.
examples. Yeah.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Everyone's in favor, okay. And then you have another piece.
Yeah. The diversity impact report, a diversity report card, as it's previously been discussed, was something that Greg and I met and talked about and realized that we wanted to proceed a little bit more cautiously and with a little more input from folks. The idea of a report card is pretty intimidating. So what I did, what Greg and I did together, was actually request from the City of Albany Human Resources individual, Melissa Roja, data from whatever data we could get. And what we got was employee EEO4 reports from 2011 and 2019. So those are the first 2 pages of the packet, and what's on the screen in front of you is a compilation of that data compared to what the U.S. Census projections are for the City of Albany. So in the Commission's September 2018 report to the Council, letter to the Council, I should say, there was a statement that the data wasn't available. But there is actually a heck of a lot of information that can be put into meaningful, there's a heck of a lot of data that can be put into meaningful information that can be potentially actionable. So what I'd like to do is just address you or direct you to the 2 data sets, the points where the data came from, and then look at the 2 pages of reports that we have. So what we're looking at up here on the screen is the City of Albany employee demographics for 2019. The city, according to HR reports, employs 140 individuals, and this is gender. Blue is boys and red is girls. So we have many, many more, well, not many, many more. We have more than 50% male employees than female employees. The city demographics, and I want to point out down at the bottom of this slide that the U.S. Census Bureau American Community Survey 5-year estimates is the source of this information. So although many of us believe that the population of Albany is 19,000, the American Community Survey 5-year estimates set it at 16,471. So I'm not sure how to deal with that, but that's just what we have as the source. And we're at 4951 male-female. So we have a disparity. We got more male employees than we have female employees. Lots of potential reasons for that. And from those reasons and from a lot of conversation could derive perhaps a more equitable distribution of male and female employees. So we're going to move down a little bit on this page. Isabel, can you help me? This is 2011, so we can actually look at this over time. So in 2011, we had 125 employees in the city of Albany, and our census was 16,926. We were still at 50-50, more or less, as a community, but we had still a preponderance of male employees. And then moving down to the next little section. Thank you, Isabel. This is white, African American, Asian, Pacific Islander, and other. Now, these are not things that I made up. They are the way the EEO4 report reads. And the citywide demographics don't necessarily precisely link up or match the way the demographics for the employees do. So in other words, the American Community Survey 5-year estimates and the EEO4 reports are not written under the same set of definitions. However, if we look at what the comparisons are, we get a general trend. These are not exact numbers. And I think the other thing that's important to note when you look at these is that we're looking at two bars that have very, very different numbers. So the top bar is 140, the bottom bar is 16,000, and a tiny little tweak in the top numbers is going to make a big difference in how much distribute. So just keep that in mind as you look at these bars. So that's where we are. We have a large percentage of white employees, larger than our citywide demographics in 2019. And you can look at the other distributions as well. And then the very last page is a comparison of where we were in 2011. So this is just presented to you in terms of, again, Greg and I are very much interested in being respectful of what the city is ready to look at and what other input we can possibly get from folks. But this is what information is already available. It's just a way of presenting it and discussing it. So we'd like to continue this conversation with you. We don't want to go anywhere with these reports yet, except to include them as part of our minutes for tonight, and we'll continue the conversation. So, input?
Thank you. This is a good first step. There are, of course, other aspects of city life that we might want to get some numbers about. For example, service on commissions, service on city council, attendance at community events, if such things are available. There are other indicators of involvement and participation. So I'm sure you thought about that. Maybe we can begin to lay out what are the important areas for us to look at. And of course, there are other kinds of diversity. And I don't know what kind of data we have, but whatever we can find. But I really do appreciate your moving this along. Appreciate that.
Yes, I do too.
Any other comments? Sure.
Just for the numbers, does that include the teachers?
Which one? City employees?
Yeah.
No, city does not employ teachers.
The city, so it's because it's the count? No, it's the school district.
EEO4 report includes City of Albany employees. The EEO4 report for the school district, if they submit one, I'm not sure.
No, I think there was one when I looked online. You're right. Okay, so I would just, that would be another place to look, would be the teachers.
It would be another place to look, but I'm not sure it would be the purview of the commission, which is a city commission advising the council. So I appreciate your comment, but I'm not sure we're that broad in our scope.
Well, we don't have to settle that now.
No, we certainly don't. It's for future conversations, definitely.
Okay. Is anything else you think that's helpful, or if that's what you needed?
No, I'll plan to bring back a report in September.
Great, thank you very much. Thank Greg as well.
Yes.
even though he may be enjoying himself.
Nick, he's a child.
Okay. So, next we come to the, what's the other subcommittee?
Aging in place,
Aging in place, yes. See,
which we do not have a report as
I
of
need
yet.
help with desperately because my mind is going, go ahead.
No, we don't have a
We
report.
don't have a report yet, we're still working on it.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's going to be probably a pretty long process. I don't see this as a simple report and move on type of thing. I think this is going to be something that we're going to have to be looking at long-term. There's some good things out there. I think I think something that maybe we could do is meet with, or try to set up a meeting with our counterparts at the city of Berkeley. They have a very good program. And they're probably our local, I think Fremont as well has a very good program. And I think they're probably our two closest local cities that do this. So, and then Margie had showed me this wonderful survey, which is an amazing survey. It's quite long. And it'd be interesting to look at this and maybe adapt or do this with the city. And that could give us some really helpful information. So
I would like to start with the survey, and there's a lot of really good surveys out there that we could, gather information from to use.
I think, just in terms of my thoughts on where we are with this and my experience at the Albany Cares program and seeing what happens at the senior center, I think there's a lot more that we have that's already in place. We just have to figure out how to paint the picture around it. We're definitely not inventing the wheel here. There's a lot of good stuff that we're already doing. So
I think we have great senior programs, but not that many people are taking advantage of them compared to what the population. So I think that's another area that we have to look at. And Robin, who's head of the senior center, her biggest thing is to try to reach seniors who have no way of reaching this senior center. So we did do a CARES thing to the Meals on Wheels.
Right.
I think we need to go to them too to get their needs.
Okay.
I think there are some models out there of reports that have been done that already identify some variables. I know it will take some time, but I'm concerned because, for example, when we talked tonight about the environmental report, clearly there are no affirmative statements in there about what needs to be done in terms of the needs of the aging population. So it's important that we get some concrete, planning in place so that when other areas are developed, there's something for them to look at and say, have we, for example, and some of these things are not so complicated. For example, stop signs, the length of crossing lights, things of that sort that directly, impact on seniors and are not that huge a deal to change, but make a big difference to people's lives.
Yeah, and that's something that most people don't think about until you see it.
Yeah. So until your knees go and you can't make it
You
across
can't make it across.
Apple Avenue, So I would urge you to move quickly and take advantage of what's out there. And a survey, the advantage you have with a survey is that we do know what the population is, and we do have ways of reaching big chunks of it, and if not all of it. Anything else? Anyone? Yes, Leah.
As a homeless senior, this idea of aging in place is kind of a conundrum for me. What place do I age in? it's kind of horrifying to think of my future if I don't get housing. Who's going to bring the Meals on Wheels to my vehicle? That issue, I don't know if it's included in this report you're working on, is homeless seniors. I hope it's being addressed and delved into how you find homeless seniors. What's the demographic count? If we have X amount of homeless in Albany, how many are elderly? How are they faring? What do we do as we get older or get more infirm and disabled? In terms of the senior center, I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with that place. I enjoy that they have these activities, and I couldn't afford them, so I went to Sid when he was still there and said, can't we find a way to include people like me who can't afford? So right on the spot, we created the scholarship program that is there. I feel not welcome at the senior center because I'm homeless, because I need more than others. So when I go there and eat a meal, and then I say, can I take a meal home, there's this look on their face. Well, we can't really do that. It's not fair to everybody else. So there's still a lacking of inclusivity, I think, at the senior center. But I haven't been there for maybe 6 months because of own issues in my life, but because I just don't feel welcome anymore. There's a whole class of people at the senior center that got money and property, and then there's me and a couple other people, and there's just no overlap. There's no way to relate to each other on an even level. So, but my primary focus for our purposes tonight is to include us in your, where do we age? Maybe at some point we get aged enough and disabled enough that we should just be put in a housing unit regardless of the wait lists. Just get us off the street so we can age in place. So thank you so much.
Anything else?
Just a quick, Isabel, do they, when they do the annual count, do they just count, or do they try to get demographics from that?
Are you talking about the pit count, the point-in-time count?
Yes.
So yes, there is a head count where volunteers go out at 5 o'clock in the morning and count people who they see, vehicles, but then that data is given to a consultant who analyzes the data, and then there's a formula attached to those numbers, and then that's what creates the count. So
But there's no specific demographic, so no age, racial
there
makeup.
will be global, yeah, there'll be some, because they do also do very specific surveys of part of the population that are experiencing homelessness, and as part of that survey, they will extrapolate some percentages. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Isabel, two things. Would you be able to facilitate them finding, the subcommittee finding the people in Berkeley, for example, that would be useful to talk to, identify who they are?
Do you know who you want to, like, were you thinking about a commission or a staff, a senior center?
Probably staff. They have an aging in place. They have a whole, like, I believe a whole aging in place unit at Berkeley. I'll research it and find out and see if I can reach out. And
So it would be at the senior center.
yeah, it would be. I believe it's at
centers.
North Berkeley Senior Center.
I think it's closed for renovations right now.
It's closed for renovation
Maybe
right
the
now.
west or the south, the one on Russell by Ashby.
Yeah.
Whoever in the city is in charge of their
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, and you also mentioned Fremont?
Yeah, I'm going to have to double check Fremont, but I believe it's Fremont is the other city that has a very good aging in place program. And they both use, I believe they both use the AARP model.
Yeah.
But I will do some research on who is in charge of that in the city of Berkeley, and see if we can reach out to them and maybe set up a quick meeting with them and just discuss how they went forward with their plan.
West Hollywood also.
Yes, very good. Yeah, it's really.
Yeah, and feel free to contact me if you need
If
information.
the city wants to fly me to Hollywood, I'd be more than happy to fly down.
Well, we can try. And then, would you be able to check as to when the next meeting that Saha is going to be organizing about the housing project?
Sure.
I guess that's it then.
Next meeting?
Yes. So, I mean, we're done with this meeting. So in terms of the agenda for the next meeting, get a report from both subcommittees. Do we have anything else on the agenda at this point for September?
Well, there's the quarterly reports. So Albany Cares, Project Hope. So those reports will be available as part of and then we can decide if you want a full presentation or have the reports available as part of the agenda.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And anything else that you would like?
Just when is the next, because we have, it's a September, the first week is.
I think it's the first Wednesday instead of Tuesday.
It's the first
So
Wednesday,
I
okay.
provided a calendar last month, so it's in the last month's calendar.
Yeah.
I think it's the Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month.
Anything else about next meeting? Okay. Are we ready to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay.
Move for adjournment.
All in favor? Aye. And enjoy August and have a nice time being
So,
off and
I'll email you.
be back